Are you guys excited? Yes. I'm going to buy some time because I think Darby is just out for a moment. But, just like Silvio mentioned, I think we're making history right now. If you look at what's happening in this room today, this audience has nearly doubled since the last 6 years. We're seeing some great trends in this industry where, I think card linking is starting to be introduced through different platforms and products. We have an actual, a unique strength in Canada. We have TAP at most of our POS terminals, something that in the US they're still working through, right? So, there's a little bit of momentum now that we're starting to see. You're starting to see new players, you're starting to see merchants and everyone come into the room. It's great to be able to see a lot of new faces. We've been part of the CardLinx Association for the last year. I think spring of 2018, and really, really excited to see what it is. I'm actually very, very bullish in this industry overall. So what we thought we'd do today is actually tell you a little bit about our journey. We'll tell you a little bit of ourselves because I don't think we've actually introduced ourselves formally throughout all the CardLinx Association groups. Tell you about our journey to date, what we think about the digital landscape or the loyalty landscape here in Canada, and tell you how we think of it from a ventures perspective, and how we've gone about that approach, and drill down to some of the things that we've been able to do over the last 18 months. Sound like a good story? Yeah. Perfect, excellent. So a little bit about us. Can you see the height ratio? Yeah, a little bit.
It's not quite as
little
extreme,
Danny DeVito looking. So, I was trying a different way to express myself, and I thought, hey, let's use a chart because I like to see the arrow go up in the right direction. Like Liam Neeson and Taken, I built a lot of specific skills in the digital and e-commerce area. I've been both at the financial institutions, the network side, as well as the startup entrepreneurial side, and one notable company, redflagdeals.com, who I've also had an opportunity to work with Derek Zito at, who was the founder of Red Flag Deals, and I work in HR mobile startup. I don't know if you guys have been in the HR space, very, very challenging. Probably don't suggest going there, but very interesting, and it was a noble cause. Fun fact, I actually applied for a Canadian Idol. And for those of you who don't know, there's actually 3 rounds before you get to the TV judges, and I made it to the 3rd round. Then I got the boot, so. Yeah. Summertime, and the living is easy. All right, there you go. Excited, right? We're excited. I'm also a proud dog owner and dad. I have a lovely son and daughter, Marcus and Mia, and those are the best products I'll ever make in my life.
That's right. This is why it's always tough to follow Anthony in anything that you do, because I did not try out for Canadian Idol, because if I started singing, you would all run. My journey's a little bit different. We actually crossed paths with Derek and Anthony, Yellow Pages Group. We actually bought Red Flag Deals a number of years ago. I've had a couple of exits, been an investor with a few organizations, spent a big chunk of my career with Yellow Pages Group. And so my connection going back to card linking, for some of you that might know John Carter, who obviously started Empire years ago, we were looking from a YP perspective years ago on how we could actually bring to scale card linking into the Canadian market. We had opportunities to work with our MasterCard folks at that point in time to say, okay, how do you actually bring card linking tech to 300 to 350,000 businesses in the Canadian market? At that point, it was a little bit, we weren't quite ready. The card linking side of it is something that's been in my blood almost since it came out. And then last year, I joined RBC Ventures to help them, really start to launch out some of the loyalty program, cashback programs that we're launching.
Yeah, so, we're going to talk about card linking. And, before that, I've been in the offer space now almost 20 years, e-commerce, publishing. I built every type of offer redemption type you could possibly name. With MasterCard, I was with Priceless Cities. And for those of you who have done Priceless Cities, there's probably every offer redemption type you could possibly name. And if I knew card linking was in my backyard back then in 2014, game changer. And so what I wanted to do with a lot of the new faces here and just different people from different industries is kind of give you a sense of how we think about card linking. I know Silvio kind of stole a little bit of the thunder earlier about like what is card linking, but here's how we think about it from our framework. And really we wanted to get people just up to date on some of the ways the terminology is used, at least from our perspective, but also some of the different technologies that are there. And so we think of it as like, the watching and matching of these these transactions. And there's 5 key ways you could probably do that, 5 common ways. One is through an issuer. So if you had your own issuer banking platform or prepaid solution or so on, you could take all those rails. You might have a link loyalty program where you take that information, you're watching for those transactions to appear on your own rails, and then being able to set a business rule around that. You could work with an acquirer or a number of acquirers to process that information. The 2 that we'll talk to you today is the credit card network side of things, working with Visa, MasterCard, and American Express. And we'll talk about account aggregation, which is really like your bank account linking, working with the different types of third-party providers that allow you to connect your bank accounts to that watching and matching solutions. And then obviously, last but not least, but still very, very powerful, user-provided, because that's probably the easiest way to do it without any technical implementation. And there's a lot of richness to that data, but we still want to make things easier for consumers, right? There's a lot of friction still involved in that, and we're trying to find better ways to increase that customer experience because they're actually demanding it today.
Yeah. And I think to add to this as well, one of the things we're going to talk about is looking at it from both lenses, right? There's how do we make this a really, really frictionless experience for consumers, which of course a lot of us spend a lot of time on, and we spend really a lot of time on the venture side thinking about how do we actually make that user experience really well. But on the other side of it is actually the experience for the merchant, right? Because what we know in the card linking space is the content is coming directly from the merchants. And so how do you really make that process really seamless, both from the perspective of onboarding, scale, merchants want reach. And so we always look at it from both sides of the equation. And if we can really figure out that mix between the right user experience that's seamless with the right merchant experience that's seamless, now you can actually start to create the intersection, which would allow you to grow this thing to be a very, very large program, similar to what happened in the digital ad tech space, which was, you need a lot of those foundational pieces in order to get to a point of massive scale. So we're going to look at it from both sides of the equation.
Yeah. So here's some lessons learned, and I think some of these have been shared already. But again, for the audience here, wanted to make sure everyone understands and sees some of the different variations of it. So for card network, for credit card linking, definite bonus user experience. There's less friction when customers trying to onboard. They're a bit more open now to providing their credit card information, just like they would provide their credit card information into a mobile app if you're using like Uber Eats or something like that, or Apple Pay when you're connecting your card. And something that I haven't seen yet is some of that pre-authorization data that you're able to get in real time. And I think there's a magical moment there that can happen where you can interact and engage both with the consumer, but also with the merchant potentially by creating different business rules and different ways of engaging with that user in near real time using that pre-authorization set of data, which is why you definitely need that merchant mapping to be 100% guaranteed, because you don't want some weird process, pre-authorized transaction going through with an unknown number happening when you create that experience. So definitely when we think about card linking, and I remember talking to Darby about it when we were exploring this. And he's like, hey, Darby, card link. He's like, yeah, I was thinking about doing that 5 years ago with Yellow Pages. So catch up. The other thing I would just mention about credit card linking is just there's still use cases. We're still emerging this technology. We're still evolving the way we can use some of that data with both of the credit card networks and the third parties, and making sure that, again, that we're communicating that to the users and end users in a way that is in line with our current privacy and legal requirements here.
Absolutely. And so we love card linking, as Anthony said and Silvio said, because it's such a great experience from a consumer perspective. We also like account aggregation because when you look at it from a merchant perspective in terms of saying, okay, I'm investing in your particular platform in order to drive a card link offer. How do I know that this user wasn't actually already there? How do I know the full set of what that actually user has purchased? And so we're also looking at account aggregation and saying, okay, if we want to start to build out that rounded view of the consumer, how do you actually have a larger view of their data set so that you can actually create that experience on the merchant side? So I think we're toying with both sides to figure out what is the right combination between the enablement that card linking gives you to be able to scale and get users and say, wow, this is really seamless. Aggregation has a very big consumer problem because I have to input my bank account information, but what it actually does is it gives you that full rounded view, which solves kind of the merchant side of it. And so we're still trying to figure out what's the right combination between how do you actually put this together to then start to scale on both sides, and then of course you need all the tech to be able to do that. And some of the user-provided stuff, again, there's a great, companies that are doing great stuff there. I mean, send us in your receipt, what have you. It does create a higher level of friction, but it also gives you, another data source. So I think at the end of this, a lot of this comes down to enabling that experience for users, but getting the right data so you can have the confidence to the merchant to say, look, your objective of getting net new customers, we can accomplish that. Your objective of increasing incremental sales and shifting share, we can actually do that as well. And of course, data is a key component of that.
Yeah, and I would just summarize that as like, what's the problem you're trying to solve? What do you really need that data for, and making sure you understand what you really need that data for, what's the experience you're trying to provide, and think about that as it relates to your business. I would also say you don't have to use all these in silos. You may be able to stitch that solution together, leveraging a combination of these different types of solutions available.
Absolutely.
So now we'll take you into kind of like the loyalty landscape view, a quick primer 101. Some of you may be very familiar with this because you watch this space all day. Some of you may just be new into the market and just wanted to get a flavor of what's happening in Canada.
Yeah, and so really what this slide encapsulates is Canada, small, well, big nation geographically, small population, smaller than the state of California, but Canadians love their loyalty. And if we go back to kind of the first loyalty program that was introduced in Canada going back into the 50s, which was Canadian Tire Money, it's a legendary program, legendary retailer, doing great stuff. Hey, you come in, you pay for cash, and I'm actually going to give you this Canadian Tire Money, and then I can use that in other places as well. What we see is, Canadians are really engaged. I mean, roughly 4 programs that most Canadians are involved in. And obviously retail is a big one, coalition programs. So the whole real premise of this one is the Canadian loyalty market, very, very robust, but there hasn't been a lot of innovation, really up until, I guess, the last few years where we really started to see a different view on a number of different companies engaging in the loyalty play. So great market, great opportunity, and now is just how do you stitch those pieces together?
Yeah, and so we've seen some mega trends or key trends that we've happening. I think many of you are familiar with it, so we won't go into the slide in detail. But really, it's the emergence of this new digital mobile shopper. It's this emergence of this users who are expecting more because they're used to this instant gratification and personalization and relevancy. Everyone's been talking about this for years, but it's really starting to become that customer experience or user experience that our consumers are expecting day to day.
That's right, and I think the key thing here, from as Anthony talked about on the consumer side, is when we think of the merchant side, merchants have obviously, they're trying to manage this whole entire shift as well of how their customers are actually interacting with them. And so as we start to think about enabling, the scale of being able to do card linking and these kind of offers, how do you really start to remove those friction points on the merchant side, slide into their key strategies around, omni-channel and creating the experiences that they need in order to line up and sync up with what we're trying to do on the consumer side of it.
Yeah, so again, very high level view of the loyalty landscape in today. You have a few folks from Air Canada. I would love to see the new solution that you guys are looking to unveil in the upcoming year. Maybe Darby, you want to just chat about this a little bit?
Yeah, I can. So, when we look at the Canadian kind of marketplace at a very high level, I mean, the traditional programs, a lot of the legacy ones have been around for quite some time and have done amazingly well. I think, almost everybody in Canada probably is a member of Air Miles or Aeroplan, which are really the two programs that really kind of laid the groundwork for really loyalty within the Canadian marketplace. Even RBC Rewards, which has been around for 20 plus years, is in there as well. Now we're seeing a lot of evolution as all of these programs are really starting to think about, okay, mobile and what have you. And then now, when you really think about the loyalty side of the equation, there's a lot of digital first programs that are out there. And so I think, at one point, the swim lanes used to be very, very clear in terms of who is into loyalty, who is into this, who is into that. Now we're starting to see this blend that is starting to come from both the traditional players as well as new players. And I mean, we even put players like Ritual in there who, directly don't really compete in the loyalty space, but they do. I mean, card linking is about how do I drive frequency? Well, guess what? Ritual is doing an amazing job of driving frequency within a very, very narrow vertical. And so all of this to say is the landscape in Canada is growing. Canadians are very, very passionate about it, but you've got a lot of programs that are there. And of course, what we know, one thing is the big bottleneck is going to be on the merchant side because there's lots of consumers and they're going to play right across the board. There is a limited subset of merchants, and I think the real question is who really creates that frictionless experience for merchants to get that scale that's required in order to actually get the user side of it.
Yeah, and I would just say, hey, we have an ode there to Carrot Rewards. They're looking at different ways to incentivize users, not necessarily through a transaction, but through health. And I think if you think about this space, finding different ways to help people earn or being able to reward or incentivize them in different manners, through action, through user input, through data, through transactions, that space is going to start to evolve, and we'll start to see some pretty interesting things over time. So these are some the ingredients, I would say, that we've touched on around it being adaptive, being immersive. For those from MasterCard, the experience, we've always talked about this experience. What's that emotional connection we can make to the end user? How do they feel about that state? I think experiences has been a big focus in the offers in the offer space over the last 5 to 8 years at least. One thing that we wanted to call out here is being predictive and helping do the actions or present the end user with actionable actions that they can do. And I think as we get better with that, you hear terminology like machine learning and AI and so on, being able to predict and understand some of the trends and habits of what those users are expecting, making it easier for them, making their life easier. And so as part of that research, we've toyed with points and cash. And I don't know if we've netted out at a standstill. I'm pro cash. We'll see Darby's pro point sometimes. And really, we are seeing we've done tons of research over the last 18 months with users. And they really relate, their cash back to their credit card programs. I was very fortunate to be at MBNA when we launched Smart Cash, for example. And we saw a lot of uplift and uptake. And I think part of it's just understanding cash is very easy. I don't have to equate the translation of what's that point value to cash back. But we know it's not necessarily merchant friendly. And so there's some things there that we have to balance within this equation. But we definitely see this rise, and I wouldn't say rise, but really this still standing strong view that cash is still king when people think about it from a rewards perspective.
Yeah, and I think one of the points on here, and sees there's a common theme here, Anthony's always talking to the user, I'm always talking to the merchant. We actually do flip back and forth on that. But I mean, obviously merchants are key drivers. I mean, when we really think about the content set that we're going to need to require it in order to get mass scale on users, that content really comes from the merchant end of it. And so when I think about this business and I say, okay, how do we really get the doors unlocked on this one? I always look at the example of Google. What Google did really, really well was open up their API platforms in order to allow for a mass scale of advertisements to come into their system, while they then created a program for publishers that allowed them to monetize their vehicle. And by stitching those two things together, Google obviously is in a position where they capture the most revenue dollars. Whether or not their actually platform is the most effective or not doesn't matter. If you're the CMO of a company and you've got to make a decision in terms of where you're going to deploy capital, it's very, very easy to buy with Google and Facebook and basically reach this entire audience. And so now the question is, within this sector, how do we do that same kind of mechanism and format? Because if we want to compete with those players, we have to have a method that allows us to simply get it into the system as fast as possible in order to fulfill that user side. So there's that constant frequency that users now look at this as kind of like a norm.
Yeah, and the final trend, and I think Sylvia would be happy to see this, card linking is gaining familiarity. Yeah. And we have guys like Drop who launched in Canada maybe a couple years ago to thank for the bank aggregation, introducing that. Rakuten obviously making some waves. There's a company not here, I'm not sure if Jerome's here, but Twango. Twango launched Tab by Twango in Montreal about a year and a half ago with MasterCard. And so these were early adopters of the programs, of the solutions, trying to bring these to life. One thing we think about is the experience. So traditionally, a lot of the publishers in this space, and there's, coming back from the Red Flag Deal days, we're a small group of online affiliates, and I think that's just because of the traffic and size of Canada. But if you think about some of that experience here, training those users as well to a specific experience with your brand and with interacting with your product, and I think looking at the experience of card linking, how do you integrate the two and make that experience more seamless for that end user so that they know what to do and how do they understand that process?
Yeah, and it's interesting from a Canadian perspective. So it's been about 5 years. It was about a year before John launched Empire that we started to talk about what was going to kind of happen within the card linking area and that side of it. And at one point, we actually really did think Canada could be a lead on this one, because Canada, from some aspects, we are leaders in terms of the way that we do payments and what have you. And for somehow reason, it just really didn't kind of click off. But I think, as Anthony said, the momentum that is starting to build behind this, you can actually see it within the marketplace, and you're getting great players that are involved. And I think this is really a scenario right now where the rising tide is actually going to lift all boats. And so I like the fact that, as an industry, we're looking at just how do we get the tide bigger, and we'll worry about the other details at a later date. But the market's shifted quite dramatically over the last half decade to where we are today.
And so we've built some guiding principles around how we think about building products, and we've used this to formulate some of our thought process and some of the new products that we're going to show to you today.
Yeah, and so again, both of these really have the lens of what problem are you solving for a consumer, what problem are you solving for a business. When we really think about it, I mean, the clear value prop in terms of what problem am I solving on both sides of the equation is obviously clear, goes without saying. I don't think there's anything here that's new, but just kind of the way we think about it. What does the meaningful rewards mean, and what does it mean from a consumer perspective? Because really what we're trying to find is that intersection of what the consumer wants that's going to give them a real interesting behavior change to what the merchant needs in terms of how it's going to drive their business. And when we can find that intersection between the two, that's where the real magic happens. And if you go too far one way or too far the other way, then both sides don't work out. So really when we think about meaningful rewards is on both sides of the equation. How do we deliver those expectations? And what's the process to be able to do that? And then again, we really focus very heavily on that kind of first moments in time, that first earning potential from a user, that first redemption moment, which conversely goes right, to the same thing when we look at it from a merchant perspective.
And before we introduce, I'd just like to mention that we have a few RBC folks here in the room as well. So encourage you over the networking session to interact, come and visit us, talk to some of the players, and you can ask some deeper questions as well. But one of the products that we've taken on is this fiercely local product called DIP. Who here has downloaded DIP already in just an anticipation? Great, okay. By the end, we'll have 100% penetration and download, and it'll be great. And really, we're just trying to make cashback simple. And if you think about the shopping experience and the rewarding experience, we're trying to make that simple, both for the merchants as well as for consumers. We don't do any of the attribution that you see currently into some of the card linking or other programs today where a user has to accept. We just stick with a straight old card link into the program, and we'll start to engage you and so on as you engage with the product. We are with Visa and MasterCard. We were 3 months launched in May with MasterCard. July, we launched with Visa. We're happy to have Visa here as well. And it's been great learnings. I think we are up over 50 locations in the GTA area. We have a clear strategy around how we do that merchant development and so on. Arjun here, who leads a lot of that merchant development activity, is here, and we actually just closed, I think, 7 locations again last night. So really happy to see this momentum and growth start to play. We are in iOS and Android, and we're actually looking to launch on the web very, very shortly as well to help complement some of that experience. And really it's about local discovery. We want to make it easier for people to find what's around them and earn cash back. And in their local neighborhoods, we've seen other entities like Ritual, really leverage this density play around that market, and we can actually copy that playbook and use that as part of that density play for local neighborhoods. I would actually say as we evolve the product. I think of it as BlogTO, which is a very prominent site done right, and we really want to highlight the merchant stories and the stories behind why they started some of those businesses and so on. And I would love to be able to evolve into finding different ways to reward and incentivize consumers in different ways outside of just transactions. So that's where we are today. We have very ambitious plans to grow in 2020, and would love to talk to you about it after this session.
Yeah.
I'm not showing the other slide because we're like,
Yeah, we're competition.
competition
so
up
I don't
here.
know who's here has downloaded Ampli. Excellent.
Who would like to experience more on DIP?
Yeah, oh. Yeah.
Thank you.
Please, coming out of this, download Ampli more so I can have one up on Anthony. No, we have it's a friendly competition.
Leave us a rating and just comment DIP in. That's okay.
So Ampli, for some of you that may not know, this was announced last June at RBC's Investors Day. It was really kind of announced as more of a loyalty type play. Since then, it's shifted a little bit. I mean, really, Ampli is, at least from a merchant perspective, and I'll tell you a little bit from the consumer perspective, at least from a merchant perspective, Ampli from a back-end perspective is really built around, if I take elements of ad networks, Google and Facebook, to elements of affiliate networks, to elements of kind of CardLinx, how you bring those pieces together. From a front-end perspective, Ampli is a cashback program. I mean, a user comes into the program, they link their banking information. Card linking will be coming in 2020. And it's really just an unlock notion where I have, connect my information. And then what we do is we built a watch and match technology on the back end to be able to look at the transactions so we can match that up. What you'll actually see with the product is very much a personalized engine. So not the same users are going to see the same thing. It's really, we really look at this from the perspective of no different than what it should be with your Facebook feed. Every user, every individual is very unique and very different. And so what we really need to be able to do there is create an experience that allows users to see something that's highly relevant for them. And when we flip that to the merchant side, of course, that becomes critically important because some merchants may want to do something very different for this segment audience. Some might want to do something very different for this segment audience. And so how do you really look at it from an audience perspective and drive that thing for merchants? We've launched nationally, so we don't compete with DIP in the hyper-local space at this point. So most of the brands you're going to see that within Ampli are very much national brands with locations. And then we've introduced it a little bit of twist. It is a cashback program, so everything that you do earn is cash. At $15, you can move out from there. Eventually, you'll be able to move out into points and what have you. But we've also introduced this notion of dream stakes because we do understand that sometimes, for customers that are very, very, very highly loyal, we need another alternative currency. And so we use this thing called Dream Stakes, which is a great user engagement tool, but it gives us another lever as we start to talk to merchants in terms of how do we be able to solve their particular problem. If it's, hey, I don't want to give a massive amount of value to the people that are the highest loyal to me, so what can we do in terms of a different currency to make that happen? And so that's really the way Ampli is kind of broken out and how we're different and somewhat similar to DIP.
Yeah, I just want to cap it off. When I say get, you say dip. Get. Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity for letting us speak today.
Please have a seat, and I'm going to join you guys up on stage. Well, okay, we got a third chair here. Wow, let me grab this. And maybe if you guys can take the two seats of honor here. Really exciting presentation. Thank you for that. I've got a lot of questions, but I'm not going to ask all of them.
I want the award, Silvio.
Right. Well, you were saying this is a historic conference in Canada.
Moment. It's historic.
But actually, that is the first time in all our years and all of our conferences around the world, Shanghai, Paris, London, it's the first time we've had a keynote sing on stage.
There you go.
That's pretty cool.
We start all of our weekly meetings with Anthony singing.
With Anthony singing. That's
very
cool.
We used to.
That's very cool.
I ran out of songs.
So my first question is, I brought my little prop here. This is my Apple Card. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned in my opening comments, they did $10 billion in credit lines in the first month.
Yeah.
So at current course and speed, this card would be bigger than the entire Canadian market in 1 year.
Yeah.
So I'm going to hand that to you.
Thanks. Can I charge?
Well, you can't because there's no card number on there. So you know. So my question to you guys is,
Can I borrow your phone?
well, yeah, I left it there. They're separated. So my question to you guys is, you guys are one of the largest card issuers in Canada, the largest bank in Canada. How do you guys feel about this product?
Want to go first?
I'll let you go.
I think it's a great product.
Okay.
I think you know, for your utility and the way it's designed and so on, it's actually very well designed. I think there's something there that we could take note of to say, how do we evolve, you know, card products overall? So I think that's something that we're definitely looking at. Or you know, I would say, hey, it's nice. It's interesting to see the growth and projections that they've been doing and how they've been looking at the product. But I think it's just, you know, businesses are evolving, and we need to learn how to evolve with the different types of products that we have and make sure that we're developing products that consumers will use every day.
Yeah.
Darby, what do you think?
Well, I think that you know, what Apple is doing with this particular product is solving a really interesting problem. And I think, as you said, right, Apple's not doing this because they're very much interested in terms of, hey, what can we do within the financial sector segment? They're really doing this to say, how do we continue to sell a high margin product in terms of our phones? I do think that it's actually good that a company like Apple is doing this, because what it does is it raises the level of awareness from a consumer perspective, and that raising of awareness from a consumer perspective to say, hey, you know, cashback and what have you is a great program, a great thing to do. From a merchant perspective, it starts to become, oh wow, this might be an alternative vehicle to be able to try business as opposed to, you know, the normal traditional digital marketing vehicles that are out there. Right. I think it's actually going to be a good thing for the entire industry. And there's lots of room, I think, for players to have. So I don't think Apple's not going to win it all, but I do think they're going to innovate, and they, you know, very much lean around building great consumer experiences. It'll be interesting to see on the backdrop for some of the merchants that they're working with directly, is it driving for those merchants the requirements that they want? And we'll see on that front. But I think it's a great product. I think they've done a good job in terms of rolling it out.
iPhone 11 Pro's on Silvio today.
Right. I'll take that back. Thank you. Question related to that. You know, a lot of the debate that we have with issuers, of course, there are two different types of CardLinx programs at least. You showed 5, but at least 2 mainstream ones. It's either the card issuer provides offers, or it's a publisher that's providing offers across multiple cards. But the question for an issuer is CardLinx offers a nice to have or a must have? Like, obviously Apple decided that it was a must have, right? So every card in the US comes with CardLinx offers from some pretty big merchants. You guys at RBC have started to do it as well. You don't have it in every one of your card portfolios, but it is in Canada, is CardLinx offers going to be a must-have or just a nice-to-have?
Maybe I'll start off. So we'll say for the credit card network and aggregation account aggregation solutions, from the ventures perspective, we think these are emerging new solutions that are going to happen. I'll just preface, like on RBC, that they've been doing like issuer account linking for a long period of time. They've had RBC Rewards. They actually introduced Pay with Points last year themselves. So they've made a lot of strides just organically using their own kind of watch and match capabilities to be able to do that. And I think it's really about that user experience, right? As I think about customer expectations today and having that instant gratification, and you know, as you see a lot of the different solutions doing all that work for you, I do see a large opportunity for card linking with credit cards and with account aggregation to really take a foothold in Canada. Be great to partner with guys like Rakuten and so on to really raise the industry here in Canada and participate and play, because I don't think alone we could actually do it alone. I think we need to do it as a united front to raise the industry and the solution here, especially with the content, because we know content is what's going to drive usage, and we want to make those merchants happy. So we need to find all the different avenues that we can with partners to make sure we can convert and make it feasible for the merchant side as well.
Yeah,
Darby?
I think with what we see from a user perspective and what we see from other players that are in this space, I don't see it as a nice to have. I think you've got to have a very, very clear view of how this how this is going to work out over the next few years. And I don't know whether that's going to hit mainstream in 12 months or 24 or 5 years or whatever, but I do think it is. I think consumers like it. I think consumers really like the experience. I think there's a lot of things that merchants like about it as well. I do think there's some challenges. So I do think as an industry, some of the big things we need to figure out that we haven't figured out yet is how do you deploy this in scale, right? Because if you really want to create a deep personalized user experience for a user, and I always use the example of, the Facebook feed. Everybody in this room has a different Facebook feed, right? And when you think about offers and you think about that, one of the most frustrating things that I see is when I log into an application and my wife logs into an application, we see the same list of merchants and the same offers. And it's like, that is just completely inappropriate, right? She's a very different person than I am, and so how do we do that? And so in order to get to that level, to really, really create those kind of experiences, I think the industry has to figure out how do you actually unlock this. And I would look to the ad tech world, because the ad tech world has done a great job in a very short time frame of unlocking, billions and billions of dollars globally and creating it agnostic regardless of country and geography or language that you're in.
Great point. And we're going to open it up to the audience and get the microphone out. And I just have one last question. So you guys have been really, really digging into this, not just in Canada, but you've come to our conferences in the U.S., in Seattle, and San Francisco, Japan. Darby, you went all the way out to Tokyo, and so you saw some of the leading implementations of this in Japan and China. So as you look across that and you come back home here to Toronto, what do you think is different about the Canadian marketplace versus some of those other markets that you visited? Is there anything inherently different about Canada?
Well, we're colder.
Well, that's true. That's true. That's true.
So anyways,
Yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head at the beginning. In some aspects, Canada's been very far ahead, especially around the regulation side. When we look at when I see the different markets that are there, I think Canada is still quite behind. I mean, I think we're easily a couple of years behind. Obviously, what Rakuten has done in Japan and the ecosystem that they've created there, I think is a real testament to an amazing company that really thinks about all of those touch points, and I would say probably is farther ahead than most when it comes to that kind of an ecosystem. But I do think Canada can catch up very quickly in terms of getting on par with what we would see in the U.S. market or the Japanese market or what have you.
Great. Anthony, did you have anything to add?
No, again, like I think I mentioned, we have a unique advantage. We have tap, so it makes people we're just used to it from Canadians. I think we're a little bit more hesitant to adopt newer technologies, but I think with the right players in the room, moving that industry forward as that ecosystem overall, I think we can get that adoption. And we've seen already some companies start to make that headway into the space. And it doesn't hurt when we see what's happening in the U.S. And we use that as validation that these things are working. Obviously, we need to make sure the business models work here for us in Canada as well. But we're the North.
Right, we the North. Got it. We got some questions. And if you could just state your name and your company.
Sure. Hi, my name is Dinero. I'm from Interac. Thank you guys for your energy and your passion. This is quite a fantastic learning opportunity. So my question is for either one of you, what do you think Interac's role could potentially be in this environment, and whether do you have insights as to how other debit networks across the globe have participated in CardLinx offers?
So my first response is let's get on stage right now. Let's just do it.
Let's
just do it. Let's just do the deal.
Okay.
Let's do the deal.
All right.
Second, again, Interac is very. There's not a lot of markets that have an Interac per se, where it's a bit fragmented in some other countries. Canada has that unique advantage. So I think Interac could be that missing piece to what customers are used to using. They may want to use credit, but they may also want to use debit. And it depends on the shopper and personal preference. But I think let's have that conversation. So come on over here, Dinero, sit right there, and let's just do the deal all day.
We got another question here from FIS.
Mladen Vladik with FIS. Great presentation, guys. Anthony, if this card linking thing doesn't work out, you have options. So that's good to know. Darby, question.
You saw my profile, right?
Darby, question for you. You talked about account aggregation, right? And the need for the holistic customer view. We see that becoming more and more relevant in the US space. So can you talk a little bit about how you guys, go about that, especially, given the fact that you're solving for this from the RBC perspective, right? And I think it's applicable to the space in Canada as well as in the US. Thank you.
I think it is. I mean, and that solves, in some aspects, aggregation solves a very important problem more on the merchant side than maybe necessarily on the consumer side, because there is a friction point relative to it. When you think of, the underlying techs like Yodlee and Plaid and the players that do this, which is really scraping kind of your bank account information, which is really the underlying tech. And I think if you're transparent with the user, what we have seen, if you're transparent with the user around why you're using this data and how we're going to use it for the purposes of creating value for them, I think at the end of it, most consumers are fine. What it does give from a business perspective, again, is that view, because one could argue, it's the same argument that digital used against the traditional folks. Well, yeah, you can run an TV ad, but how do you know it actually worked? Well, candidly, you can run a Google ad. How do you know it actually worked? And candidly, you can run a CardLinx offer, but did it really drive anything new? Or is it just somebody that linked their card because they wanted a discount for 5 or 10%? So, I think aggregation and what we're doing in the CardLinx space gets us closer to being able to articulate the value. But I think there's part of that equation that says, okay, would that a consumer have bought from me anyways? Right? Or are they just doing this because of that particular reason? And so I think where card aggregation helps as an augment is be able to give you a larger data set to look at and understand, okay, if you want to solve and put the hat on from a merchant perspective, you need a little bit more of a long-term lens around a consumer profile than just actually a single transaction.
I would just add, if you think about the data, I think you really need to identify what data do you need to be able to use and collect to be able to demonstrate it, because you could actually just be inundated with so much data that you don't know what to do with it, and then you run into all these privacy issues of how you're going to use it, what you're going to need to collect with it. So I really think you need to think about what data do you really need, and even with the aggregation, there's other solutions out there, like all the accounting companies have done the aggregation, so they may have cleaned some of that data for you, which would be beneficial to some teams who don't want to have to go through a lot of that cleansing effort. So I think it's really understanding that problems that you're trying to solve with the data that you specifically need, and how you want to go about collecting it.
Yeah.
Great. Do we have one more question? Okay. Was there one more? I thought I saw one more hand. Okay, I think we can keep moving here. Thank you so much, guys. That was a great presentation. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Darby. Really appreciate it.